So we're thrilled to have Stan with us. Stan Sakai is a comic book creator, really best known for what I've already mentioned, which is the creator of the legendary comic book series Usagi Yojimbo, first published in 1984, and telling the saga of the rabbit samurai Usagi Yojimbo, a character inspired by the life of the famous 17th century samurai Miyamoto Musashi. Sakai's stories and drawings include faithful references to Edo period Japanese history and folklore, architecture, armor, and weapons. Usagi Yojimbo is also heavily influenced by Japanese cinema and includes references to the work of Kurosawa, and the title of the series is derived by Kurosawa's 1960 film, and as well as he's referencing icons of popular Japanese cinema such as Lone Wolf and Cub and Godzilla. Stan is the recipient of Parents' Choice Award, an Inkpot Award, an American Library Association Award, a Harvey Award, 4 Spanish Hochstor Awards, several Eisner Awards. In 2003, he won the prestigious National Cartoonist Society Award in the comic book division. And recently, in 2011, he received the Cultural Ambassador Award from the Japanese American National Museum. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over and welcome Stan Sakai.
Thank you. Am I turned on the mic? Can you hear me? Okay, good. I am Stan Sakai, and I am a cartoonist. I have been doing cartoons, well, when I say cartoonist, it's in the world of comic books. It's a person who both writes and draws his own material. But there's a lot of cartoonists here or artists around. But do you know where the word cartoonist comes from? This is a museum. You have to know stuff like that. It comes from this. Do you know what this is? Cardboard. That's where the word cartoonist comes from. Back in the Renaissance, back when Michelangelo was painting on the ceilings and Leonardo was painting on the walls, they had like an assembly line process where the master artist would do a small sketch, and an assistant would, by using the grid method, transfer that small sketch onto a big piece of cardboard. Another assistant would then poke holes along the lines of the cardboard, put it on the ceiling or on the wall, dab paint on it so that you'll have a bunch of dots, and basically connect the numbers. And in Italian or French, the word for cardboard is carton. Is that right? Carton. And the person whose job it was to poke the holes in the cardboard was called le cartonist. And it eventually became the cartoonist. And so that's also where the word for like egg carton, milk carton comes from. But that's my legacy, cardboard artist. As I said, now this is really informal, so please bear with me. If you have any questions at all, raise your hand, shout out your question, and I'll do my best to answer it. As I said, this is really informal. I've been doing comics or artwork for the past 30 years or so, and I'm best known for this character here, Usagi Yojimbo. Now, Usagi literally means rabbit. Can you see me? Yeah. Yojimbo means bodyguard. So he's a rabbit bodyguard. He's like a sword for hire. He's like a gunslinger in the Old West. And the first question I'm always asked is, why a rabbit? Now, I grew up reading comic books, and comic books gave me my love of reading in general. And I wanted to do a comic book series inspired by the life of a real-life samurai named Miyamoto Musashi. Musashi lived at the turn of the 17th century. Early 1600s. And he was an innovator. He developed fighting with 2 swords. He was also a philosopher and an artist. He wrote the Book of 5 Rings, which is used today, though more in business practices. And I wanted to do a series inspired by the life of this person, Musashi. But one day, while just drawing in my sketchbook, I drew a rabbit with his ears tied up in a chonmage, a samurai top knot. And I loved the design. It was simple, but it was unique. No one else had ever done it before, tied up a rabbit's ears. And so I loved the design. So instead of Miyamoto Musashi, I named my new character Miyamoto Usagi. And I have been doing this for, like I said, 30 years. He first appeared in 1984 in an anthology comic book called Albedo. And then he got his own series from Fantagraphics Books, which is headquarters in Seattle. I moved over to Mirage Publishing. Mirage is the creator of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So there are a bunch of Usagi Ninja Turtles crossover. When Mirage was going to discontinue their comic book line, they gave me about 8 months' notice. And so I sent out, I think it was 7 letters to different comic book publishers and got back 11 responses saying, we want to publish a comic book. So I thought that was great. Diana Schultz, with whom I had worked before on a story for Kumiko, contacted me and said, Dark Horse wants to publish it, and we'll publish it as soon as the last Mirage issue comes out. We'll have the first Dark Horse issue comes out. And I had worked with Diana before, I loved her, and so I went with Dark Horse. And currently my publisher for my current series is Dark Horse. Fantagraphics still has the right to the first 7 trade paperbacks, and the rest is all published by Dark Horse. So thank you, Diana. Now, anyway, what I'm going to talk about today is basically my character, Usagi, and also how I develop a story. I'll take you on a step-by-step look at how I create a comic book. Now, the first thing, let's see, let me get my notes here. Now, in the past years, besides Usagi, I've done a lot of other books. Star Wars, Grendo. I just finished a Mouthguard story. I did a Rocketeer story. So I'm not just stuck with Usagi, but Usagi is something that I love, and I own the character. So I also control or have a say in the merchandising. Usagi's been translated into a number of languages. I think more than a dozen languages. And growing up in Hawaii, it's just mind-boggling to know that people in Indonesia or Poland are reading my stuff. Now, the first thing I do when I think of a story, and where do you get your ideas? That's the question all creative people are asked. Whether they're a poet, a writer, a cartoonist, where do you get your ideas? And they will always say, I don't know. Ideas come from everywhere. The entire idea for Usagi Yojimbo came from a sketchbook, a small piece of my sketchbook. I had gotten ideas from a single line in a documentary or a single line in a book I'm reading. And I do a lot of reading and watch a lot of the documentaries. My biggest source of ideas is Diana Schultz. And she's wonderful. I love her to death, but I'm deadly afraid of her. When she says, I have a deadline at the first of the month, you better believe I get my artwork in by the first of the month. One story that I did was an original graphic novel called Yokai. It was a fully painted book, about 60 pages or something? And when she pitched that idea to me, I said, I think I'd like to do that. Well, Carrie's idea, my designer, Carrie Grassini, was he thought of the idea for was it Usagi's 25th anniversary? Yeah, and he pitched it to Diana. Diana pitched it to me, and I told Diana, I'll have to write the story, I'll have to do the drawing, I'll have to paint everything with watercolors. It'll take me at least 3 months to do. She said, I'll give you 2 months, and it better be in by then. And I got it in 2 days ahead of deadline, and I was so proud. So once I get my idea, then I do research. Now, I talked a bit about where you get your ideas. I have done stories about, let me go through the entire step of where I got my idea for one of my favorite stories. It's called The Kite Story. The Kite Story is told from the perspective of three people. There's a kite maker, and it goes through the entire process of how you make one of those giant odako, one of those giant 40-foot fighting kites. And then it takes a perspective of gamblers. There's a kite festival, so gamblers come to town, and they're cheating the people with their dice and everything. And that was the hardest thing to research. How did gamblers cheat back in feudal Japan? Yeah. I asked my mother, she knew. But the third perspective was from Usagi. And that entire idea came about, again, from a little sketch in my sketchbook. I had bought a book on kite making, Japanese kite making, and I thought, oh, I should do a story about this someday. And it was about 5 years later that I did a quick drawing in my sketchbook. Okay. And it was very simple, like this. I mean, a lot of my sketches in my sketchbook are just basic ideas. And I thought, hey, that's an idea. And so the entire story tells, like I said, the kite maker goes out into the forest, gets mulberry bark. I told the entire process of how they make paper back then, washing. Then he gets bamboo, seasons the bamboo for the bones of the kite, how he lays it out, has a giant 40-foot kite, does the paintings, takes it to the kite festival, and he has his gang of workers flying the kite. They're about to lift up the kite. The gamblers come to town, they're cheating the people, and Usagi comes to town because he wants to see a kite festival. He sees the gamblers are cheating the people, he exposes them. The gamblers are upset with him, they chase Usagi out of town, the townspeople chase the gamblers out of town, but Usagi makes his escape from the gamblers, holding on to one of those giant kites. So that's one way that I thought of the story. It was the entire process, and it just fit together nicely. Other stories I have done is, I'm probably the only Western artist to ever do a story about seaweed farming. And that came about because my parents went to Japan once, and they said, and they showed me pictures, and they had mentioned this is a seaweed farm. And I had never thought of seaweed farms. So I thought that was great. I went to Salem, Massachusetts, and they have the Peabody Museum, which is wonderful. There's a great Japanese collection. And I had heard that they had a documentary they're showing about seaweed farming. So I was in the area, so I went to the Peabody, and I took notes on seaweed farming. And that became the basis of the research from this story about seaweed farming. Another story, soy sauce. I'm Japanese. I grew up eating soy sauce. But I never thought about how soy sauce was made, especially in the old feudal Japan, the 1600s. And I was just fascinated. So I did a story about that. And whenever I do a story with a lot of research, I try to do story notes or bibliography in the back, just a little more information about aspects of the story that I had touched upon. And I had, done a lot of research. I have a nice Japanese collection, Japanese book collection, as well as video collection. So I found about 4 or 5 different references, and I followed this particular soy sauce manufacturer on a small island, and I basically used him as the model. And it was just fascinating. Each soy sauce from different factories tastes different because of all the mold and bacteria that's on the walls, and that's essential to creating soy sauce. The story that I had was that there were 2 rival manufacturers. One of them had died, and his son had taken over the business. But he wanted to expand his business. So he built a new factory, but he did not use enough of the old wood. And that was his downfall. His soy sauce tasted bad because he did not have the old bacteria. And so he was trying to sabotage the older guy, his competitor. And that's where Usagi comes in to save the day. And it's just fascinating. made find little snippets of ideas, or just someone had remarked, "Oh, did you hear about ice runners?" Like, what? No, what's ice runners? Well, in the middle of summer, the shogun would have people go up to the mountains, to the glaciers or ice caves, and then bring ice back to the capital. And they'll take about 4 or 5 days. They start off with a huge block of ice, and by the time they get back to the capital, they would deliver ice the size of your fist to the shogun. And I thought, oh, that's neat, you know? So I did a story about that, and that's where I get my ideas, basically from everywhere. But once I get my idea, I need to write it down. The idea is not real to me until I write it down. And I write it down in the form of an outline. And you basically know what an outline is. For me, I just write out those scenes of action, bits of dialogue. And because I'm the writer and the artist, I can be as vague as possible, and it's fine for me. And it won't make sense to most people, but it does to me. Once the outline is done, then I would do what's called thumbnails. And they're called thumbnails. Each page, each rectangle here is a page of Usagi art. And they're called thumbnails because they're just a little bigger than your thumb. And again, basically because I'm the artist and writer, I can get away with doing stick figures. If I needed something to be approved, or if I'm writing for another artist, they would, of course, be bigger and a lot more detailed. But for me, this is fine. Let's see, I'll show you a giant thumbnail. Let's do a thumbnail. Oh, you. Person, boy in the green shirt in the front row. What's your name? Aiden? A-I-D-E-N? Oh, good. Let's do a thumbnail of Aiden's day. So Aiden, what exciting thing have you done today? Oh yeah, but first thing, do you live in a house or an apartment? You live in a house, okay. Here's a drawing of Aiden's house. Let's give you a smokestack here. It's Portland. So, okay. Okay. Then you woke up. Well, you woke up to a nice day. Let's see now. I don't do caricatures, but let's see. Okay. There's your pillow. And okay, you woke up. What did you do? You ate breakfast? What did you eat? Cereal, okay. Okay. And then what did you do? You got here. How did you get here? Car. Your car? What kind of car is it? Toyota. You drive a minivan. I know how to draw minivans, okay? Actually, it's a bus. You came in a bus. Then what did you do? Stood in line. Okay, you came in. And then you're here, okay. So, this is a thumbnail of Aiden's day. It shows a story in pictures and words that makes sense if you read it in a certain sequential order, and that's the key, sequential order. You can see, I also use various tricks such as close-ups, far-away shots, medium shots, just to make it look interesting. And this is a thumbnail. From here, I would do the pencils. This is a pencil of one of my old covers, and usually I would draw ink directly over the pencil, but in this case, for some reason, I did not. The first thing you notice is that the original artwork is much bigger than the printed page when you see a comic book. And for me, this is a good size. It's comfortable for me to work with. I can get enough detail in here. And when it gets reduced down, all the little imperfections in line and line quality kind of disappears and smooths itself out. So this is a pencils. From here, I would do the inks. As I said, I would normally do the inks directly on the pencils, but in this case, I did it on two different sheets. Little aside here, all these dots are handmade. And for my covers, I have a little ritual of I would count how many dots. I have no life. And for every 100 dots, I would put a little dot at the top. I've been doing this ever since I started. So this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 19, 20, 20. 2,176 dots on Usagi's clothes here, not counting his family crest. And it's just I think you guys have noticed all those dots at the top. And no, you never have? Oh, okay. It's just something I've always done. No. There's a Usagi website, UsagiYojimbo.com, and we actually have had contests. How many dots are in this cover? And if you guess it right, you'll get a T-shirt or something. And some people actually blow it up, count the dots. And we've had people come as close as 1 or 2 dots off, which just astounds me. The lengths that some people go to get some free stuff. Now, in the old days, oh, okay, that's a good idea. Yeah. For these lines, I would do, well, in this one, actually, I did. But normally what I would do is use a straight edge in the pencils and then do it freehand in the inks. And I kind of like the rough look to it. I mean, it's straight enough, but it's a little bit rough, and I think that goes well with a story based in feudal Japan. For a while, I was doing everything freehand except the swords. The swords would be all straight with a French curve. But I'm lazy. I just stopped doing that. Yes?
What is the size of that page?
The size of the paper itself is 11 by 17, and the size of the image area is 10 by 15. And for me, this is a good size to work on. And right now, it's pretty much standard in the industry, or even a little smaller. In the old days, it used to be even bigger. And I've got a Steve Ditko Spider-Man page, which is about twice as big as this, and it's just gorgeous, yes.
And your art style is so unique. I was wondering how you developed it.
My art style, the way I developed it is it basically came on its own. There are a few artists that I really enjoy. Serge Aragonés. My first big art influence was Steve Ditko when he did Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. Excuse me. Serge Aragonés, Mobius. One of my big influences for inking is Milo Manara, his old black and white style. I love his ink work there. But it pretty much developed on its own. Don't worry about developing a style when you're starting out. Worrying more about, getting proportions right, doing a good drawing and good storytelling. Yes, you in the red?
You mentioned doing something about yokai.
Mm-hmm.
Did you include a kitsune?
Kitsune? Yes, I did. Yes, I did do a kitsune. Kitsune is a fox, and in Japan, foxes are magical. They can change shapes, and they're like the coyotes in the old Native American legends, where they're tricksters. And I had both. Actually, I have a character named Kitsune, and my character Kitsune is a female street entertainer. She does. She works with fans and swords, but then she's also a thief. So she has a dual personality, and I like that. That kind of lends itself to the name Kitsune. And she is based upon the old street performers of the Edo period. Okay, here's the fez. Okay. But that's my kitsune. The kitsune of legend are foxes. And when foxes reach 900 years old, they grow 9 tails and turn golden. And that's a nice little legend in Japan. And I have used kitsune a few times in my stories, the fox characters. And Japan is wonderful in that it's a small country, but it has such a rich tradition of folklore, not just the really horrific things, but also the really goofy things, like let's see now. They have this umbrella. And it's an animated umbrella. It hops around and does mischief. A lot of times it has hands. And so I've used things like that. They have these a foot that hops around as well. And they also have like tea kettles and things. Where that tradition comes from, these yokai or ghosts and goblins that are from animated utensils, that comes about from the Japanese tradition that if a household item reaches 100 years old, it develops its own personality and comes to life. And that's one reason you don't see many used or secondhand stores in Japan, because you never know how old that skillet is. And you don't want to take the chance of it coming to life while you're cooking your ham and eggs on it. So I thought that was really interesting. Yes?
I assume that tradition does not extend to swords.
No, household items. Yes, household items. Now, listen carefully. There's a test later. Anyway, I got totally distracted. But once the inks are done, then I send the originals off to Dark Horse. And I am an old-fashioned artist. I don't use a computer except as a paperweight. And so I work on paper. I send in the original artwork. Not many people send in the originals anymore. Bless FedEx, it's wonderful. And then my colorist, Tom Luth, does the coloring. Now he does computer coloring, but he used to do basically what's called call-outs, where he would actually paint a Xerox, and then each color has a different code. I don't think I have a call-out of this particular, no. But anyway, let me show you, once the colors are done, then the colors are separated. Let me show you the separation process. When it's printed, the first thing that's done is that all the yellows are printed out. And then the magenta is printed right over the yellow. Now you can see there are certain dark areas and there are lighter areas. The lighter areas are done with dots of color, like dots of magenta. And the darker areas are solid magenta. So the more dots or there is, the darker it is until there's no dots and it's 100% magenta. You can see how the colors are blending optically. You have your oranges now. You see the yellows, the reds, the oranges now. The blue is printed as a third color. And then you have the greens and the browns. The black lines are printed as a fourth color. We could probably get away with just using 3 colors, but we want the black lines to be as sharp as possible, so they're printed as a fourth color. And there it is, and here's the actual comic book. Not all my work is printed or colored by Tom. I also do watercolors. This is for a cover for book 20, what is that? Is that 6 or 8? 5 or 6? Anyway, it's one of the more recent trade paperbacks. And this was done with ink and watercolor. That's a medium that I really enjoy. Also, it's fast, because I used to do oil paintings for the covers, but an oil painting would take me a full week. I can do one of these in a day. So, I just don't have the time anymore, so watercolors are great. Any other questions? Do you have any questions? Yes, in the back?
Can you draw Mouthguard?
Mouthguard. Do you like Mouthguard? Yeah, well, David Peterson's a nice guy. I actually did a Mouthguard story for a thing called Legends of Mouthguard, and we exchanged pinups. He did a Usagi Yojimbo pinup that was really nice. He did like 4 different seasons, Usagi in 4 seasons, and I did a drawing of Usagi and one of his characters fighting a giant crab. Let's see. No.
Was it the one with the hooks?
The hooks?
Yeah.
I don't remember. The Mouthguard is medieval mice. And at one point, I was wanting to do a story about medieval mice myself when I started reading Brian Jacques' Redwall series. Yeah. Anyway, that's Mouthguard for me. It's a very quick one. But one neat thing about my industry is that I've gotten to meet my heroes. I mean, I work with Stan Lee, I knew Jack Kirby, even the European artists I've gotten to meet. I went to France, not Spain. I went to Spain with Neil Adams, and it's kind of neat. It's a small enough industry where people know each other. And when I was growing up, we did not have things such as conventions, or everything was done out of New York, and I had no ambitions to become a comic book artist. But nowadays, with the internet and everything, it's pretty easy to get your work seen out there. Yes?
What do you think it is about samurai culture and samurai, the legends that are surrounding that so resonate with Americans? Do you think that it's because we have a tradition of the Wild West here that it kind of parallels? Or why do you think it's caught on so well here in the United States?
I think because it's such an alien culture. It's so different from the Western culture. They have both like traditions of honor and loyalty and everything. This is something we'll get into when we talk about 47 Ronin. But there's also the violence, but yet there's a serenity to it. It's the yin and yang of violence as well as serenity. There's lots of contrast in Japan. And I'm 3rd generation Japanese American. And so for me, everything is done by research. So I grew up in Hawaii. There is a strong Japanese American community there. I grew up with the bone dances and the festivals and everything, but still, it's very different for me. Yeah. There was a question somewhere here, or? Yes?
Have you ever got a chance to meet the reclusive Steve Ditko?
I have not met Steve Ditko. That's one person I would love to meet. Another person would be a European artist named Michetz. He does what I consider my favorite samurai series called Kogaratsu. And he's a Belgian artist, and I've been to Belgium twice. The second time, I had a two-man show. It was myself and Michetz. It was taking place in the Japanese Tower, which is a national landmark. It's right next door to the king's residence. So it's not the palace, but it's where he actually lives. And there's actually a queen's door. It's called the queen's door that leads to the garden, the queen's garden that the royal family can go visit the Japan Tower. So I went there for the opening, thinking for sure I'll meet Michetz there, but people tell me he's such a curmudgeon and a recluse that he refuses to meet anyone. And he does like my stuff because he did give me drawings, and he even drew 4 covers for the Dutch edition of Usagi. So, you know, he likes me well enough, but not well enough to actually say hi. But that's, I've never met Ditko, Steve Ditko. Like I said, I work with Stan Lee, and the neat thing about this industry is that I have got to meet my heroes. I knew Jack Kirby. Stan came about because he needed a letterer for the Spider-Man newspaper strip. And he called me up out of the blue and said, "Hi, this is Stan Lee. I'm looking for Stan Sakai." And I kept thinking, he really sounds like Stan Lee. It's so strange. And he is exactly the way you picture him to be. When my daughter was 4 months old, we took her to her very first comic book convention. And she had a picture taken with Stan. And when I went to see him, I gave him a copy. This is when, before digital, everything had to be printed out. So I gave him a copy of the picture of Stan and Hannah. The next time I went to see him, there was a picture of Stan and Hannah on the wall, framed, right next to the picture of Stan and then President Reagan. I thought that was so sweet. I had mentioned to Stan that, "Oh yeah, you're my son's hero," because at that time Stan was hosting the Iron Man cartoon series. And so it's, "Oh yeah, whenever you're on," Matthew tells us, "Quiet, quiet, Stan's on." And I just mentioned to Stan, and the next day, a big box appeared on the doorstep, FedEx, and all these signed things, comic books, toys, all kinds of stuff, all signed to Matt. And Matthew was using his Spider-Man backpack at conventions for the next 5 years or so. Even now, he's in college, but it's hanging on the wall in his room, so it's kind of neat. He's a sweet guy, yes.
Tell us a little bit about Jack Kirby and what he was like.
Jack Kirby, you know, he looked like a really tough guy, but he was the sweetest guy ever. And my wife would actually talk to him a lot because his wife, Roz, would not let him drink coffee. And she would have to sneak coffee, and my wife is a big coffee drinker. She used to be a big coffee drinker. And then they used to talk coffee. The thing about Kirby is that whenever we talked, he'd tell us war stories. And the thing is, it was always the same war story, except something was slightly different. He would tell us the story about when he killed 3 Nazis in the room. And the next time he'd tell us about the story that the time he killed 3 Nazis and they're sitting on the steps. And he must have killed half the German army 3 at a time. But no, he was the sweetest guy. When we went to his funeral service, his nephew got up and said, the first thing he said was, "My Uncle Jack really hated Nazis." But he was the sweetest guy. He really was. He and Roz were, I mean, he was a giant in the industry, and he was such a neat guy. You know. Yes.
You said a few minutes ago that you didn't have the ambition to be a comic artist initially. Was there any one big break that happened for you, or something that got you?
Well, it's not that I did not have the ambition to become a comic book artist. It's just that everything was done out of New York at that time. Kirby was the first big artist to leave New York and still remain a comic book artist. That's when he went to California and he got into animation, but he still was doing comic books. And before then, it was you had to be in New York. All the editorial offices were there. Now with the internet and everything, FedEx, this is even before the time of Federal Express or fax machines and everything, you had to be in New York. And I wanted to be an artist, but it wasn't until I moved up to California that I met up with the art community there. And then I figured, you know, I can break into the industry. And I started with a small press independent comic book called Albedo. The first, it was just limited to, at that time, just 2,000 copies. And Usagi was in the second issue. Another character, Nelson Ground Thumper, was in the first issue. But after the second issue appeared, then publishers started coming to me to ask me to do work for them. The first was Kim Thompson at Fantagraphics. He was saying, he just told me, I'm starting a new comic book anthology called Critters. We want you to be part of it. And Usagi was one of the more popular features, so Usagi got his own feature a couple of years after that. And I've been working ever since. I did not realize how lucky I was to have stumbled into the industry the way I did, because I never really had to pitch a product or anything. So, yeah, no, I've been extremely fortunate. Yes?
This is another mythology question.
Mm-hmm.
So, about there's the reason there are Japanese bobtails are because they used to cut their tails.
Yes, yes.
They believe that once they reached a certain age, they would be their tails, but now they get power to raise the dead and make puppets and stuff. Have you ever used a character like that?
I have. In fact, when I did a story about Obachan Echo, Obachan Echoes are cats who become possessed by evil demons, and they become human-like and can take revenge. One big story about the Obachan Echo is that a woman died, and her faithful cat took revenge upon the murderer. And in Japan, you see a lot of cats with just those stub for tails, and that's because they believe that if a cat retains its tails, it could become possessed. So they would cut their tails off, the tails of cats off. And so there's a lot of cats running around with little bobtails. Yes?
What's your day like? How do you spread your work out among your different projects?
Basically, I'm working all the time. I try to. I usually get up at about 5 in the morning and do some business around. I try to be at the drawing table for about 10 hours would be a good day for me now. You know. But you know, I have no commute. No, really, I have the best job in the world. I have no commute. My editor doesn't know what I'm doing there all day. You know, I'm goofy. I'm watching. I work with the TV on. I'm right next to the kitchen. My studio is right next to the kitchen. Time for a sandwich. I mean, you know. There's no one. I don't have to punch a clock. However, I am self-employed, so you know, if I don't work, I don't get paid. So I have to have a discipline where I work on a regular basis. And unless you get that discipline, you'll never make it as a freelance artist. You have to have the discipline. And it helps that I love what I do. And it helps that people ask me, if you weren't doing comic books, what would you be doing? If you weren't a cartoonist, what would you be doing? And I said, I have no idea because I have no other job skills. No, really. Yes. I have a fine arts degree from the University of Hawaii. At that time, though, the big rage was abstract expressionism, and that really helped me not at all. However, the core courses that I had to take, life drawing, color theory, that really was valuable to me. But as far as my major, no. After I had my fine arts degree, I also did further studies at the Art Center in Pasadena. And Chuck Jones was the instructor there. But basically, my big thing was I was majoring in advertising design. And at that time, I was thinking, oh, maybe if comics doesn't pan out for me, I'll go into advertising. But fortunately, I dropped into comics, and I've been doing it ever since. Yes, in the back there?
I have two questions.
Yes.
First one, what place did you first publish your drawings and books?
Well, for Usagi, well, I've always been drawing, and I was doing work for magazines, record album covers, newspaper illustrations. But the first big break I had was at Albedo. This is 1984, and it was a guy in Seattle wanting to do a comic book, but not having enough material to publish. So I sent him an 8-page story called Nilsson Ground Thumper, and it sold out. And then he called a few months later and said, "What else you have?" So I sent him Usagi, and I've been working on Usagi ever since. There was another question in the back, yes?
You mentioned history, folklore, all these other
Mm-hmm.
ideas, places to get ideas. But then at the beginning, you also mentioned samurai cinema.
Mhm.
I'm wondering what are the films that, or what part of that gives you some ideas that you enjoy?
A lot of my references or research or influences come from more from film rather than comic books. I like the way film tells a story, how they introduce characters such as Frankenstein, the original Frankenstein. When you first see the Frankenstein monster, he walks through a doorway, but he doesn't walk through frontwards. He walks through it backwards. And right at that instant, it tells so much about the character. And I've been wanting to do stuff like that, where visually you can talk about the character or reveal about the character just in an instant, the way when he first is introduced. Film does it really well, and I tried to do it with Usagi. I'm really happy with the first Usagi story, and that pretty much set the tone for everything. And you had mentioned research, and yeah, I try to do as much research as I can, but I often, fall short, and when I do, I hear about it from the fans. I did a story where Usagi plays a game of Go. It's a board game. Go is a board game. And I used to play Go as a kid, but what I didn't know is that it wasn't Go. It was called Gomoku. And it used the same board, the same game pieces and everything, except it's like comparing chess to tic-tac-toe. And when I had Usagi playing the game of Go, and he says, I won the game of Go. And I heard about that mistake in emails from as far away as Germany, say, "That's not Go, that's Gomoku, you idiot." But fortunately, Usagi first comes out in comic books. It was floppy comics, and then it gets reprinted as in the book collections. So I went to a Go tournament. I bought a book on the history of Go. I went to the website of the American Go Masters Association, and who knew there was such a thing? So I not only was able to correct that mistake, but the layout of the game pieces on the board is they're in the same position as this famous duel between two Go masters in 1859. And I'm still waiting for someone to come up to me and say, "We caught that. That is great." So anyway, and I see we're out of time. There'll be one more question, and then we'll go off to a book site. Yes, way in the back. Oh, I grew up in samurai movies. I grew up in Hawaii. Right down the street was the Kapulu Theater. They would show Chambara or sword fighting movies every Saturday, and you could go in for a quarter. So yeah, Usagi Yojimbo. Well, Yojimbo was a bodyguard. And it was like a gunslinger in the Old West, where he was a sword for hire. But it was also like a tip of my hat to Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo. And I actually got to see Mifune, and he was quite impressive. I got his autograph, and it's totally illegible, but it's Mifune, so it's pretty neat. Yeah, I think it is. Anyway, thank you. We'll have a book signing after this, and then talk with Mike.